Okay, I've started the recording. Dipali, Anisha, can you see this? Dipali, can you see the screen?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
We don't celebrate, no?
Other people do, na?
Students.
नहीं, students are anyway they don't come.
Your mind, actually you whisper also, no? We can all be
Even if you're something something.
You were giving samosas. She is giving samosas.
It's on the way. We can start.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for coming in. So thank you, everyone, for joining in. We welcome Professor Divya Bhatia to give the talk on pointing movements in visuospatial working memory, the work she's been doing and the work she has done earlier. And she wanted to introduce herself. So over to you, Divya.
Thank you. Yeah, the introduction was for if students join and people from JEPs or other places join, then we could have a formal introduction, but I think most of you already know me. Hello everyone, thank you for joining us this evening. So I'll be introduced, so I think I'll directly start this without skipping the formal introduction. So I'll be introducing some of the work that I have done in the past on pointing movements in visuospatial working memory. So this is, so broadly the question that we were interested in was focused on how the movements and the working memory basically interact. What is the relationship between the two? So that is what is reflected in the title here, that we will be, so by this title you have some idea what is coming up. So we'll be talking about a lot of experiments, there are a lot of data that I'll be presenting here. And because it's from Cognitive Neuroscience and I've done my PhD in Cognitive Neuroscience, so I'll be presenting the data from behavioral experiments, eye tracking experiments, and EEG experiment. So let me begin with the pointing movements by introducing pointing movements. Now, pointing movements are, there is nothing new about pointing movements. All of us know what pointing movements are because we make pointing movements all the time in our routine actions in our day-to-day life. And as you can see in this picture here, pointing movements are to direct someone's attention. There are different functions that pointing movements can serve. For instance, to locate an object in the space and time, to direct someone else's attention, or even for gestures. So we also use pointing for gestures. And there is another line of research which investigates the role of pointing movements in language. So that's the gesture research. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about its interaction with the working memory. So this is a little bit of background of the pointing movements. Now, I would like to direct your attention to these two pictures here. So in these pictures, what you see is that there is one person who is making a pointing movement, and then the other person actually directs his attention towards the object in the space where this person is pointing at. So what does this mean is that pointing movements can help us, can help direct other person's attention. But what is striking here is that it is someone else's attention. So sorry, it is someone else's pointing movements which direct this person's attention. So, okay, there are different questions that we were interested in. Question one was how the pointing actually interacts with working memory. So, these scenarios, I think all of you are familiar with these scenarios. We do this all the time, right? But the question is whether pointing movements have some role to play in working memory. Do they have something to do with working memory, or do they have something to do with the way we encode information from the environment? So that is the very first question. Now, second question is, do the pointing movements which are performed by another person could have similar interaction with our working memory. Because if you look at this scenario, this person's pointing movements can actually perhaps interact with his working memory, but what about this person's working memory? Because the pointing movements are performed by this person, but they are having indirect relationship with this guy's working memory. So these were the questions which these were the questions that we were interested in. So to begin talking about what we did about these questions and how we investigated these questions and how we converted these questions into the laboratory experiments, we did a paradigm and we did dozens of studies on this. So I would, before I speak all of that, I would like to introduce the study paradigm. To do that, I actually have printed it for you. So I would just okay. Okay, so everyone has a paper. This will help you understand the paradigm a little bit better. So what we have here is two arrays of objects. There is an array of squares and there is another array of circles. What I want you to do is, we don't need a pen. So what we want you to do is that, yes, put the paper like this. Yes, like this.
Right.
Horizontal. Yeah, yeah. The squares are your move arrays, meaning that I instruct you to make the pointing movements towards the locations of the squares.
The squares should be on the right hand side or the left?
Doesn't matter.
Video. Become Divya, I have one question before you start. When you said this person's, the one, what do you mean by the person who is pointing fingers and his working memory, or
Both. So the pointing movements are performed by one person, but it is actually influencing the other person who is looking at the pointing movement
the one
performed
who is
by the
pointing
person.
as well as the one who is with whom they interact with that?
Yes.
Did you listen to content of working memory? Is it a spatial test?
Yes.
Keep going on.
Yeah, we can.
The recording is being on.
Yeah, the
All right.
study.
All right. So let's move on. So in the task that you have at hand, it's a simpler version of what I have. So what I'm going to show. So it's a Visuospatial working memory task. You are presented with two different arrays. One array is made up of squares, other array is made up of circles. Now it's the encoding phase, as you can all see. So you are paying attention to these different locations in space, and consider a square as the move array, meaning that you make the pointing movements towards these locations, wherever the squares are printed on the page. Consider this a computer screen, because these experiments are conducted on a computer screen. So you make the pointing movements towards the locations of the squares, but passively observe the location of the circles. Could you please do that and let me know what works better for you? Do you think that your memory is better for the first condition as compared to the second one? Do you think that your pointing movements sort of interact in some way with your working memory? Does it enhance your working memory? Do you think that you remember the squares locations better than circles locations?
Sorry, I only know one condition. What is the other condition? I'm not able to.
So circles are visually encoded, meaning that you passively observe the circles, you will not make the pointing movements. So that we have one array which is a move array, other array we call it the no move array. So the squares are the move arrays, meaning that you, while encoding, by paying attention to it, you also make the pointing movements towards the locations. For the circles, you do not. Circles, you visually observe. So there are two conditions. We have two arrays. Now the question is your memory better for the squares as compared to the circles? Yes, maybe not, right? Most likely, yes.
बैक नहीं हो रहा है इसको थोड़ा बैक करें मैं कैमरा सेटअप में जा
So I need the slides.
Where we can go without it.
But I need the slides because the paradigm is
We
different.
can leave the camera part. Yeah.
We can leave the camera.
Yeah, exactly. So you are sort of representing your
No,
configuration.
this is not the slide.
So this is not how the task actually works because it was a serial presentation.
I think
of items.
the
So one
meeting
item
was
at a
ended.
time. But because I cannot do it,
Yeah,
so this
meeting
is just to give you an idea of how the
Yes.
paradigm works.
They have the slides online.
Alright, so this is how the study paradigm looks like. One object at a time. This represents the computer screen. One object on the computer screen at a time, and the array that we are interested in, because it is a Visuospatial working memory task. So we devise this task to understand the question that we have been asking, whether pointing movements can have some sort of interaction with working memory. Can pointing movements which we perform towards to be remembered target locations actually enhance the memory for those locations? So that is the question we were interested in, and to answer that question, we created this paradigm. We came up with this paradigm. Now, here if you look at, this is of course the beginning of a trial. This is the fixation cross, and then the trial begins. Participants are presented with two types of arrays. One array of locations or objects is made up of squares. Other array is made up of circles. One of this is move array, other one of this is the no move array. And participants are instructed at the beginning of the experiment. This is counterbalanced across participants. So for instance, for 10 participants, the move array is square. For other 10 participants, is the circle. And also the location is different, meaning that sometimes for some participants, circle will appear first. For some trials, circle will appear first. So everything is counterbalanced. Every possible permutations and combinations that you can think of, it was counterbalanced. Now one array, let's say for example, the squares were the move arrays and the circles are the no move arrays. To move forward, I need to know that you understand a move array and a no move array. Move array is the one which we are encoding through the pointing movements. So if a square appears on the screen, participants takes his right hand and makes a pointing movement towards the location of the square. When a circle appears, participants does not do that. Participants are instructed to passively observe these locations, and at the end of it, there is a recognition test. And participants do not know whether this array will be tested or this array will be tested, and these arrays also differ in size. Sometimes we had 3 object arrays, sometimes we had 4 object arrays. 5 we didn't take because that doesn't fall into the limit of the working memory, because we have 5 plus 9, 7 plus n is root, the limit of the working memory. So this falls well within the working memory limit. And now any one of these array will be tested. So participants in advance, they do not know which array will be tested. So they have to keep in mind all of these locations. In the recognition task, any one of these array could be tested. And again, all of this is counterbalanced. And then they are presented with the locations of these objects. Squares, if the squares are tested, the locations of the squares. If the circles are tested, the locations of the circles will be presented. And these configurations could either be same or it could be different. So it's the same different judgment task.
This card has just one object, and the recognition card has multiple objects.
Yes. Yes. So it's a serial representation of the items, and at the recognition, all of these items from one array, which is the test array, will be presented on the screen, and participants are judging where they appear, whether it's the same locations or they are different locations. So this is the study paradigm. This is the basic study paradigm. Now in further experiments, we'll be making modifications to this. And then, so we understand the task by now, right? Now let's have a look at the results. So this is the move array, just to give you better view. This is the move array. This is the no move array. Here we had a mask or a maintenance phase of 150 milliseconds, and here we had the recognition test, which lasted for about 5 seconds. Or if they press the key earlier, then it ends earlier, and then the second trial begins. Like this, we had about 96 trials with different counterbalancing conditions. Look at the results here. Now it might appear complicated, but it's not. What we are looking at here is, so what we are interested in this presentation is just the accuracy for the move and the no-move arrays. So the dotted lines here are the accuracy for the move arrays, and the solid lines here are the accuracy for the no-move arrays. So what do you see here? This is the recognition accuracy. For the move arrays, you have better recognition accuracy as compared to the no-move arrays. So what does this tell us? This tells us that pointing movements have something to do with working memory. And these questions, they were not investigated before. So they were, and in fact, the interaction between the working memory and the movements isn't being investigated a lot. So this first experiment, this was the very first experiment. This first experiment tells us that it is interesting because there is some sort of interaction. Something is going on. So we have a positive effect of self-performed pointing movements. Now I'm calling them self-performed pointing movements because another condition I'll be introducing now. So here the participant was the one who was making the pointing movements. So that is why self-performed pointing movements, like you did in this experiment. But this wasn't all. We are happy that we got these results. It was very interesting results, but that wasn't all that we were interested in. We wanted to actually investigate. We wanted to move one step beyond. We wanted to investigate this condition. So if you look at this condition, the pointing movement is performed by this guy. This is how we generally behave in real life situations. So the pointing movements, for instance, is performed by person A, but it is somehow benefiting memory for this person. So how? It's movements which are performed by someone else, but they are having some interaction with my memory. How? So we wanted to investigate that. How does that work? Whether it works. Whether these movements have some memory advantage for this other person's working memory who is looking at these pointing movements. So that's what we were interested in. So basically we were interested in this question: how do movements and memory interact, and more specifically how executed movements, which we call the self-performed movements, and the observed movements, which are performed by someone else. And we observe these movements as participants in a task. Because in real life situations, this happens a lot. So we were interested to investigate how executed and observed movements interact with one's visuospatial working memory. For this one, we have already seen the results. It helps the memory. There is better memory for the items which we pointed at. Now let's look at the second condition, which we are introducing as the others performed pointing movements or the observed pointing movements, meaning that there is going to be another person in the experiment who will be making the pointing movements for the participant. So what is that? And all of these ideas, they were based on the mirror neuron theories, and they were based on the motor simulation theory. Now all of these theories, they propose that observing someone else's performing a movement is the same thing as I do it. So all of you here are aware of the mirror neurons stuff, and well, this is really fancy stuff, so we didn't really base our ideas on this, but basically on the motor simulation theory. So which predicts a neural similarity between the covert action states and the overt execution of an action. So to investigate this, we conducted a second experiment, which was the passive observation of the pointing movements performed by another person. Now let's see what happens in this case. So the study paradigm remains the same. The only change is that there are two people sitting next to each other. One person is a confederate, and one person is the real participant. So for instance, there is an experimenter, let's say. Experimenter sitting next to the participant, and participant is the one who always has to do the memory task. And the confederate is recruited or is called to participate in this experiment to perform the pointing movements for the participant. So there are two persons sitting next to each other. One person makes the pointing movements, other person is the real participant who has to observe these pointing movements and do the memory task. So that means whenever and then again, all of these conditions are counterbalanced. For half of the participants, the squares are the move arrays, for other half it's the circles. So whenever the move array appears, the confederate or the experimenter makes the pointing movement. Participant's task is to pay attention to these item locations and try to remember them. So we predicted a memory advantage because this is what happens in real life situations, and this is what motor simulation theory says. But we didn't find it. So what we find here is that there was no effect of this observation of pointing movements performed by another person. If you look at here, there is no significant difference between the move and the no-move condition. Okay, we were not very happy, but that wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. So what happens next is that now I'm going to introduce you to another keyword, which is an entire different line of research. So I'm going to introduce you to the joint action research. In the joint action research, this research began with this one seminal paper, which was published in 2003, representing other sections just like one song. What does this research tell us? So all of this line of research, it actually began with this one experiment, which was published in 2003. What is this entire line of research based on is very simple phenomena that we see in real life, such as lifting a table. Lifting a table together with a partner. Partner can be anyone. So for instance, there is one person on the side of the table, other person on the side of the table, and they are both trying to lift a table, move it to another location. How do they do it? It's very simple, we don't often think about it. But if you want to investigate this, how am I as a person who is trying to lift a table together with a partner who is on the other end, how am I predicting his movements? How do I know when my partner is going to make a movement? So this action prediction, how do we do that? So how do people actually behave in situations when there are two people in a situation, in a task, and they're performing the complementary part of the task? So action prediction and action understanding, action planning, all of these questions, they become part of the joint action research. And it all began with this one experiment, which I'm going to introduce now. So in joint action research, what happens is that you take a task and you divide it between two people, because most of the cognitive psychology experiments happen in isolation. So you call one participant, you test their whatever question you're investigating, and they go. But in real life, we are actually heavily influenced by other people, and we also have multiple social interactions and a lot of things. So the entire idea behind this was to make the cognitive psychology experiments more valid. No, they're already valid, but there's this other term.
Environmental.
No, anyways, but yeah, to incorporate the social context in these experiments. Okay, so I'm going to now introduce the very important and very interesting experiment which was conducted, which actually sparked a lot of interest in researchers around the globe, and this entire line of researchers started with this. So it's a very simple experiment. All of you know the salmon task. So what happens in a salmon task is that there are two stimuli. There is a red circle and there is a green circle. Both of these circles, they appear at not different locations, but sometimes, for instance, the green and the red circle, they can appear here, here, or the center of the screen. And the keys which are associated, it's a reaction time experiment. So the keys which are associated with these stimuli, for instance, with the green one, the key is associated, which is it's the left shift key, and with this, the red stimuli, the key which is associated with this is the right shift key. So what generally is observed in this task, and it's a very simple salmon task, I'm sure most of you would have done it. What we observe in this condition is sometimes it's a congruent condition, sometimes it's an incongruent condition, meaning that there is a mapping between the key, there is a spatial mapping between the key and the location where the stimuli is appearing, right? So it can be left, 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 right, or it can be right, right, or right, left. When there is an incongruency between the stimulus and the key, response key, we see that there is a higher reaction time. So, and this higher reaction time and the difference between the incongruent and the congruent conditions is known as the Simon effect. These people, so it was this very simple Simon task that they make a very fancy version of the Simon task, which has sparked a lot of interest in the world. And it all began with these two people. They were postdocs then, Natalie Sevens and Gunther Noblik. They're not big shots. They're in Central European University. They're not full professors. But when they published this article, they were postdocs, and I had the pleasure of working with them. I spent part of my PhD in their lab. So what they did was that they created a version of the Simon task, divided it between two people. So in their version of the Simon task, the red and the green stimuli stays the same. How they changed the spatial feature of the task was by incorporating a finger. So there is a finger and there is a ring on the finger. Now the ring of the finger can either be red color or green color, same as the Simon task, same as the stimuli of the Simon task. Now in the Simon task, what was happening is this stimuli can either appear on the left of the string, right of the string, or in the center. To have that spatial feature in this task, they had a finger. Now this finger can either point to this person, which is sitting on the left, or this person, which is sitting on the right, or no one, meaning that this finger is pointing straight. So they divided this task between two people. So basically there were three conditions. There was one condition when this task was the simple Simon two-choice reaction time experiment, which was conducted by a single person sitting at the center of the screen, doing the entire task alone. When the entire task alone was conducted, the results are like this, which is the simple Simon effect experiment that you can see. So what is happening here? It's a simple two-choice reaction time experiment conducted by one person. Higher reaction time for the incompatible stimuli, the incongruent condition. Neutral is just here in the middle, and this is the compatible condition. So you see very clear Simon effect.
Yeah, I'm a little confused. So what's the compatible and incompatible? What's the color of the ring, which then determines whether they should point left or right? Is that the idea?
The color of the ring is the red and the green, and then the finger is pointing towards the person who needs to press the key. So the finger, where the finger is pointing actually represents the spatial feature of the Simon task. So if there's a person sitting here and there's a person sitting here, he has to press the left key, he has to press the right key, and it's a red ring and the green ring. So this finger can either point to this compatible condition. The key that is to be pressed is this one, or incompatible condition, incongruent condition.
So it's the color of the ring based on.
Yes.
And these are multiple slides and they go through and then the subject responds.
Yes, several trials. Several trials we go through, and so I'm focusing on two important conditions. There were three important conditions in this task, but let's just focus on two. One was the simple Simon task, social version of the Simon task condition. And so, sorry, I haven't yet spoken about the social version of the Simon task, but the simple one-person version of the Simon task. One person sitting at the center, and they're doing this task, and this is what they find.
Classical Simon effect.
Yes, with the stimuli, right? And they get the Simon effect, as we would have expected. And then what they did, they called another participant. They divided the task between two people. Now, one person is in charge of one stimuli, other person is in charge of second stimuli, meaning that if there are two people sitting next to each other, one person is in charge of pressing the left key, which is corresponding to the, let's say, red ring, and the other person is in charge of the right shift key, and this key is mapped with the green color ring. In this condition, what would you expect? The task is divided between two people. If we have no idea, if we don't know what they were thinking when they designed this task, we would predict that, I don't know, I'm just taking care of my stimuli. I don't care what my partner is doing, right? But that doesn't happen. What happens in this case, look at these results here. This is the results from the joint Simon task condition. Exactly same as what happens here. That means take time to process this. This is the incompatible condition. This is the compatible condition. This is a neutral. So let's just forget the neutral. Let's focus on these two. So this was the two choice reaction time experiment. This was the simple version, the one person version of it. This is the two people version of it. Same results. What does this tell us is that when I'm sitting with a partner and when my partner is doing the complementary part of the task, I do not just represent my own actions and my own part of the task, but I also represent what my partner is doing. So that means what we do is that we co-represent the entire situation. I co-represent my partner's actions, and I also and I take my partner's actions into account as they are my own actions. That is why I'm seeing this result. Now, this was the very first experiment which was published in the joint action research ever in 2003, and then several experiments around the globe. Dozens of researchers took up this. They were inspired by this idea and they started doing their own research. And this result was replicated again and again, over and over, in different situations. So meaning that this, and then with this experiment, they came up with a theory, which is known as the task co-representation theory, which simply means that I co-represent in a joint action situation, we co-represent our partner's actions. Okay, so this was it. Then the last one is the individual go-no-go condition. So they had a control condition. I can talk about it later on if you like. So what happens? So inspired by this, because we didn't see the memory advantage and the passive observation of, now coming back to the pointing experiments that we were doing. So I have shown two experiments by now. The first experiment was based on the self-performed movements when the participant is making the movement towards some stimuli, and we see a memory advantage for those areas, right? The second experiment was the passive observation of the movement performed by another person, and we did not see a memory advantage. Remember all of that? Okay. Because now I'm moving on to the third experiment. So inspired by this joint action line of research, we thought, okay, so before I do that, I would like to summarize the entire joint action literature. And so this entire joint action literature comes up with two major points. One is that there are common representations of perceived and planned actions, and task representations happen in jointly performed actions. And then these ideas, they were based on and they were in line with these two important theories in the field: the common coding approach and the motor simulation theory. The common coding approach proposes that the perceived and the planned actions, they share a common representational domain. Motor simulation again predicts that there is a neural similarity between the covert actions and the overt execution state. Okay, now I'm coming up to, okay, so based on this entire literature that I have so far summed up, I conducted 3 studies. I conducted a lot of studies, but I'm summarizing 3 here. In study 1, we were focused on the question of whether and how observing pointing movements which are performed by a task partner, does that benefit an individual's visuospatial working memory. Then second study was based on an eye tracking, because then we wanted to move one step beyond to actually investigate what is happening in this effect, why we are having this effect, what are the mechanisms. And in the third study, we wanted to investigate the neural basis of it. Not the neural, but the electrophysiological. We conducted an EEG study to see the electrophysiological basis of this memory advantage. So to begin with, the methods that we have used, of course, were the behavioral experiments, eye tracking, and the EEG. So study 1, the paradigm stays the same. There is a move array, there is a no move array, and there is a recognition task. 2 experiments. This is just the recap. 2 experiments which I have already presented. Experiment 1 with self-performed pointing movements, there is a memory advantage. Second experiment, the observation of pointing movements performed by another person, no memory advantage. So 100% participants' involvement in the pointing movements, we get the advantage. No participants' involvement in the movement task, in the action execution condition, no effect. So we came up with some ideas inspired by the joint action research. we created a joint action paradigm. So we revised our paradigm a little bit. We came up with this experiment. So what we did in this case was that, so the major paradigm stays the same. The only difference was here. Now at the beginning of the trial, a Q appears, which can be P or which can be E. P stands for the participant, E stands for the experimenter. If it's a P, that means, and then again, what is a move array and what is a no move array is already being communicated to the pair of the participants. They know, so, and it changes across pairs, so it's counterbalanced. So if it's a P, that means the participant, and who is the participant? Participant is the one who has to do the memory task. The other person who is the confederate, or in some experiments it was an experimenter because of the budget. So it was the experimenter, the experimenter's only job is to perform the pointing movements when it's E there. He doesn't do the memory task. Memory task is always on the main participant. All right, so this is the only change. There is either P, so there are trials either with P or there are trials either with E. When it's a P trial, P and E? So if it's a P trial, then the move array is pointed by the participant. If it's the E trial, the move array is pointed by the experimenter. And then there is a recognition test at the end of each trial, which is always on the participant. Okay. So what does this mean? And this is 50-50%, random alternation, 50-50%. 50% of the trials, participant executes the movements. 50% of the trials, participants does not execute but observes the movement. Cool. And this is how the task setting looks like. There are two people sitting in front of a monitor and doing the task. Okay, let's see what the results look like. So what we got here was that, and we call it the joint action condition, the joint pointing condition. So what happens in the joint pointing experiment is that the memory advantage reappears. So we have the P condition and we have the E condition. Here I have this is a simplified version of the earlier graphs. So here we only want to focus on the move and the no move. So this is the recognition accuracy for the move, and this is the recognition accuracy for the no move trials. What we were expecting a memory advantage in both of these situations. So there should be better memory for the move arrays in P condition and also in the E condition because of the joint action scenario. So this is what we got. But then we thought maybe this could be because of a number of reasons. And we wanted to test all of them, but you cannot test everything. So we limit our experiments to further investigate this effect, whether it reappears in further experiments. What we did, so first thing that came to my mind was that maybe it's because of the action anticipation. Maybe because this is a random alternation between the P and the EQ. Maybe the participants, because they don't know when they have to move, maybe they are preparing their movements in advance. So maybe that is why, because action planning has something to do with the memory advantage. Because we have seen in the passive observation condition, when there was no action planning involved, there wasn't a memory advantage. So action planning is a critical component here. So when action planning happens for 50% of the trials, the effect reappears for the observation condition. This we have been seeing already. This is what is important here, because the effect reappears here in the observation condition, right? So first thing that we thought maybe it's the random alternation, maybe that's why. So we conducted another experiment. We had a regular alternation of the P and EQ. So now it was PE, PE, PE regularly, so that the participants knew when their turn is coming up. So there was no anticipation component. So in this case, again, the effect reappears. So we have the same memory advantage as we have seen in this condition. Then we thought, so now it becomes like a spectrum. So there is, at one end of the spectrum, there is self-performed pointing movements, meaning that 100% of the trials participants were involved in action execution, the self-performed movement condition. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have the passive observation of the pointing movements condition, in which case the participants are observing the movements performed by someone else, but they are not involved in performing the movements. So it now becomes like a spectrum, and somewhere in the middle of it, we have the memory advantage. But the conditions that we were having so far was a 50-50% involvement. So we wanted to see whether, and So we wanted to see how much of the involvement from the participant side is important to have this effect. So we reduced the participants' involvement in action execution as much as I could. Sorry, as much as I could. So the least I would go was the 16 trials out of 96 because of the counterbalancing and everything. That becomes the 16.66% of the trials. So that means now 16.66% of the trials, P appears, and the other, whatever is left, is the E appears. That means the participant only performs the movements for the 16.66% of the trials. And the effect is still there. So this means that some sort of involvement from the participant is important.
So your percentages are pretty drastically different. So earlier, your baseline and no move condition was about 80%, then you went up to about 90 to 95. Right now, you're below 80 for both. So if that earlier baseline had been maintained, your effect disappears. So I'm just curious.
So it's around 70% for the no move in this case.
Well, if you go back to the bar graphs, you have the bar, but the two that were connected by the dotted
Yeah,
line,
just a second.
those are much higher. So I'm curious why.
In this case,
Right? Look at the right side one. You're about 80%. Maybe it's 75.
because it is, no, because we have the array one and because there is a recency effect in this case. So what you see here is if I take an average of these two, and there is also, this also differs based on the size 3 array or the size 4 array. So for size 3 array, because it's a very small array, there is only 3 objects that you have to remember. Memory advantage is very high. If you merge it together, in all the experiments I have array 3 and array 4, but the other graphs that I've shown you, the bar graphs, I've merged these conditions together. In this one, these are separate conditions. So there is some effect, of course, higher for array 3, then array 4, then array 5. It's a load-dependent condition, load-dependent memory advantage. And also there is recency effect. So you see array 1 and array 2 in this case, so that's the recency effect. So that's why you see somewhere it's higher, perhaps 85% or so, 90% in this case, and sometimes it's below. If you merge it together, it goes somewhere around 80%.
Can I ask one more? So maybe if I understood you correctly, you said you do the squares and circles, and some they point, some they do not, and then you have your masking stimulus, and then you present the circles and the squares in their various configurations. Sometimes they're congruent, sometimes they are not.
Yes.
Right? So the data you're showing us here, where you're showing that the pointing has a beneficial effect, is that for both the congruent and the incongruent representations?
Yes.
So the pointing, even when the final image is incongruent, the pointing still is advantageous.
No, so the effect that I'm showing you here is for the same trials. So that means when it was congruent,
So
when it's the same, yes. Same
the objects are in the same location in
Yes.
the final testing.
Yes, yes.
But just out of curiosity, then, is there a reason why you aren't showing the incongruent? Does the effect not hold when you have that difference?
No, we did, no, it's then it becomes another different analysis because then you take same minus different, it's D prime, it's a different type of analysis than you take into account in the recognition tasks. So we didn't go into that. So in all the experiments, and I only did the same types of tasks that I did in yeah. Because you cannot just combine them. You cannot combine them. So in all the recognition experiments, it happens this way. There are different types of analysis that you can do. Okay, so we were here at the 16.66% condition. So this means that when the participant is involved at some level, even if it is the 16% of the trials, the effect reappears for the observation condition. So what does this suggest is that at this end of the spectrum, there is 100% involvement from the participant and there is a very good memory advantage. On the other end of the spectrum, there is no memory advantage because there is 0% involvement from the participant. And whatever happens between this, we have the memory advantage. So what does this reflect? This reflects that there is some sort of co-representation happening. Participants are maybe taking this, maybe there is a social context which is established between the participants. Maybe that is what is driving this effect. But we didn't know, we were not sure what is the underlying mechanism of this effect. So we wanted to know more, we wanted to investigate it further. So we ran an eye tracking study. Because there is, we use the SR research eye tracker system, because there is background research which suggests that, so there is a very famous eye tracking sandwich making experiment, in which, so the idea is that your eye movements reflect what you're thinking. Also, the eye movements reflect your action planning. So in this very simple eye tracking sandwich making task, it's a peanut butter sandwich making task. So participants are given all the materials that they require for the sandwich making and they record their eye movements. So the way that the participant plans their action, that at first I should look for the knife, then I should go for the peanut butter. The consecutive movements eye tracker can record the saccade. So it can record the entire scanning path. So it tells you from where eyes are moving to which point and for how long they are staying at one specific object. So eye tracking gives you a lot of information. So based on these studies, we wanted to see whether some sort of action planning happening in the action observation condition in the joint action scenario.
What if somebody hates sandwich? Will there be a tricks in the eye tracking?
They recruit the participants. I don't know if that was mentioned in the criteria.
There would be some motion. Yeah, but then there is, I think they would be concentrating on the task on the hand because they're not.
Because they're paid for it.
It's like averseness to some things can also influence your.
So in social situation, it is going to affect. So if something like that happens, then definitely.
And if they actually had to make it, I think it had a bigger effect than just simply thinking through the steps.
Right.
Okay. All right. So based on these studies, we had enough basis to run an eye tracking experiment, and we also managed to get small funding for this because the participants have to be paid. It's like 45 minutes of experiment. Right. So let me begin with the joint action condition first. So we conducted 2 experiments on eye tracking. One was the joint action condition, which I've already shown you. It's the same experiment just on the eye tracker. And the second one was the passive observation of the action observation condition. So now this one is the first one, which is the joint pointing condition, random alternation between P and E, and let's have a look at the results. So what we have here, first we replicate the behavioral findings. So we replicate the behavioral findings, meaning that there is P condition, there is Z condition, action, execution, action observation, and we see the memory advantage in these cases. Right, let's have a look at the eye tracking data. What is happening in the eye tracking? So what we recorded was the fixations and the gaze duration. So fixations are where your eyes are fixating in space, which objects, which location in an object your eyes are fixating, and gaze duration reflects how long they are fixating. So if you look at this data, what it shows you is that fixations and gaze durations, the patterns were very similar for the P and the E condition. So there were significant differences between the move and the no move condition in this experiment for the fixations as well as for the durations. So for move arrays, there were higher fixations in both conditions, P and E. So when I am moving, I make higher fixations and longer fixations towards the move arrays as compared to the no move arrays. But interestingly, when my partner is moving and I'm allowed to, or am I instructed to observe this pointing movement performed by my partner, task partner, I still have the same memory, I still have the same eye movement patterns. So this suggests that something is going on, but what exactly, we don't know. Maybe this is just the visuospatial attention, maybe just because it's the action relevant stimuli that attracts higher attention.
Isn't proportion of fixation and gaze duration supposed to be positively correlated?
To memory advantage.
Proportion of fixations and gaze duration correlated to each other.
No, we did not see any correlations. Did we try to see? We did try to see a lot of correlations. There was no.
Like,
The numbers will be higher.
Trying to fix it at something, I'll be gazing at it for a longer period of time.
Sure. I don't know. I don't have a definitive answer for this. There could be higher fixations, there could be longer, but I don't know. These two could be correlated, but in this specific study, at least we did not have any correlations. So we had independent analysis on the gaze duration, and we had independent analysis on the proportion of fixations, and we find that higher fixations, number of fixations were higher for the move, and durations were higher for the move. as compared to the no move. And what is interesting here is that it was also had for the E condition. So action activation as well as action observation, they have like similar eye movement patterns. Yes, okay, so this is the encoding condition. So you remember in the eye movement condition, we did one minor change. We added a maintenance screen here because in eye tracking, it's important that in the maintenance, your eye movement patterns reflect what is going on in your mind. So your move. So we wanted to also investigate. This is the encoding condition, and here we added one blank screen for the maintenance phase. So that was for 1 second. So in this 1 second, we also wanted to see whether the move and no move differences in the eye movement patterns actually show up in the maintenance screen. So what is going on in your mind would actually also reflect in the blank screen, because you look at if you're given a blank screen, you actually tend to look at the places what is based on what is going on in your mind. Yes. So that is what we have here. We have the encoding. The first graphs are for the encoding condition. The second ones are for the maintenance phase. Okay. Similar results. There are almost some. This is the passive observation condition. So hang on.
Yeah, but what do you mean by recognition accuracy? Encoding the objects are currently present. All they're doing is looking at the object, right?
But where they were looking, they were actually correlated with their accuracy afterwards. So where they were looking at the exact same locations where these arrays appeared at the beginning.
So by encoding, you mean that last point screen?
Yes.
That's where that image, that figure is coming
from. This one, the second one.
Okay.
Yes, one. But this is for the passive observation condition. Yes.
Okay. But they only had to look in the direction of one of the three objects, or they had to move their eyes to all three?
So in the maintenance phase, they have a blank screen. Now, please tell me the question now.
So there's three objects, three circles or three
Yes.
squares. So they only have to look at one for it to be counted as recognition, or do they have to physically move their eyes to the location where all three would normally be located?
They were free to move their eyes. We did not tell them anything.
Yes.
We just presented them with a blank screen and we were recording the eye movements. And this is what we found in the data. So we were expecting that there will be fixations will be focused on where the location, where the objects were in the location in the trial. And this is what we found. We were not expecting anything here, but this is what we found.
So it's like a mental rehearsal.
Yes. Yes.
So here they were rehearsing all the three spots.
Yes.
Could that be an after image?
Yes. This is what happens when you you move your eyes in the way that when you try to remember something.
White screen and there's a black screen and you should have an after image as well.
Then after image will only be for array 2 because we had array 1 and array 2. So that effect, I don't remember if that effect was there because I combined the array 1 and the array 2 accuracy together. So I don't remember that graph there. Perhaps it will be, of course it will be the recency effect. So of course it will be higher for the array 2, which was presented right before the blank screen. Because that is the recency effect, so that will anyway happen. This is for the passive observation condition. So we were here. So this is the maintenance screen, this is the encoding screen, and these are the eye fixations and the gaze duration. This was the joint action condition. And we had the significant differences between the move and the no move. In both conditions, P and E condition. Now, if I look at the passive observation condition of partners movement, where so we conducted 2 experiments on eye tracking. The second experiment was when the participant is observing passively, is not involved in action activation, is observing the pointing movements performed by the task partner. It can be experimental as well. So the paradigm stays the same. And here again, look at the results. So again, we replicate the behavioral findings that we have. This is the same experiment 2 that I showed at the beginning of the presentation. We do not have the memory advantage. We do not have any differences in the eye movement patterns in the move and the no move condition. So that means again that self-involvement has something to do with the way we encode information. And we rehearse the information as we have seen in the maintenance screen. So But we were not really sure what is it that is really behind this effect, because this effect shows up when you have a joint action condition. The effect shows up when the participants are involved, at least in some trials in the action execution, and then the effect appears in the action observation condition. But when it's only action observation condition, there is no action execution involved, the effect does not show up. And even that is reflected in the eye movement patterns. There is no difference in the move and the no move areas. So we were not sure what is happening. Maybe it's just the visuospatial attention. We had different theories, different explanations for that. But we were sure that the joint action condition is doing something. That is why this effect is appearing. But what something we didn't know. So we to understand that, we did an event-related potential study. Again, so for event-related potential study, we wanted to understand what is really going on. We used 64 channels brain product system. This is how the channels are distributed. It covers the entire scale. And you record the brain activity from all of these different places in the brain. We only did one experiment because that was because of the limited, there were a lot of constraints. And in the study, I collaborated with Gundar and Natalie Sevens at CEU. So we revised the paradigm a little bit, not a lot. So the P&E was now changed to LNR because that reflects left and right. And in the study, because it was highly funded, so we had enough money to recruit pairs of participants. So we recruited pairs of participants. In this case, we had a confederate and a main participant. So every time we call two participants, one participant will work as the confederate only, meaning that whenever right will appear, the person sitting on the right, who is a confederate, will make the pointing movements towards the move areas. And the recognition task is still on the main participant. The confederate's only job is to perform the pointing movements when the cue appears, which is relevant to his action, which is relevant for him, left and right. There is no major change. It is still P&E. It's just that we have now converted it to LNR. And again, the same experiment. We had two areas, and then there was a recognition accuracy. Now, interestingly, behavioral findings we replicated. So again, if you see in all of these experiments, we have replicated this result over and over again. And I conducted some 15 experiments, and this result was always there. So appears like it is such a strong effect, but you need to have a joint action condition. You need to have some involvement from the participant side in the action execution. So if you look at self and confederate type of trials, P&E, it's the same thing, recognition accuracy, move higher in both conditions. Now let's look at the electrophysiological findings. So what I have here is interestingly, and we were very happy because this is what we were expecting, and we found motor potentials. So we found motor potentials in the action observation conditions. So for instance, look at these scalps here. We have the movement execution condition here. This is when the participant moves. This is when the confederate moves, participant observes. The EEG is only being recorded from the participant. So this is the movement execution condition. This is the movement observation condition. Here, it has to be motor potential because I'm planning the action. If I'm a participant, I'm planning the action. So because there is action planning, action execution, motor potentials appear. And if you look at this, these motor potentials are lateralized. If I'm moving left hand, the potentials are on the right hemisphere. If I'm moving the right hand, the potentials are on the left hemisphere. In this condition, however, we had the motor potentials, but it wasn't lateralized because the participant doesn't care which hand you move. He just cares that you move a hand. So we had these motor potentials, which sort of tells us something that in the joint condition, participants simulate their partner's actions. And we have the motor potentials in this case, but there were other components, other interesting components, which I found. It was an exploratory study. We didn't know what to expect because there was no study to back this up. So we had different important components, which tells us a lot about how these movements, how these move and the no-move areas were being encoded. So we had N1, we had P3, and we had LPP component. These are all ERP components. LPP is the late positive potential component. So we had N1, which was higher for move as compared to the no move condition. N1 is higher for move versus no move, and it doesn't matter whose move it is. No, it's self move and the so it's self move and the confederate move, meaning that as long as it's the action relevant stimuli, it attracts higher attention. So attention is always a factor. So N1 reflects higher visuospatial attention. So meaning that whatever stimuli is the action relevant stimuli, it's an important stimuli. So there is higher visuospatial attention. Then we had P3, which was higher for the self relevant trials than the partner relevant trials. So P3 reflects self-prioritization. So I prioritize my stimuli, self-owned objects. So there is this entire literature on P3 and self-prioritization effect and the self-owned objects effect, meaning that we remember better the items which are self-owned, which are relevant to myself as compared to my partner. And then we had LPP, which was late positive potential. This was unclear why we see LPP here, because seriously there was no study like this, so we again did not have a lot of background to base this on, but we realized that perhaps LPP is higher for the no move condition as compared to the move condition. It could reflect the effortful processing, because move stimuli is being processed in an efficient way, but also maybe it was less effortful because of the pointing. And the no move stimuli was effortful processing, so that is why we see LPP higher in the no move condition as compared to the move condition. So these were the ERP findings, and altogether, this suggests that participants in a joint action condition, they take their partner sections into account and they represent them as their own actions. But a critical factor seems to be the social context between the task partners. So if the social context is not there, this effect disappears. And yeah, so the social effect or the personal involvement from the participant side is a prerequisite, and performing and observing movements activates common motor representations, which can further enrich the visual memory with motor and kinesthetic traces, and they result in better recallable memory representations. So yeah, this was it. Thank you for your time.
The social context part of it was that manipulated, was that constant part of the
So social context was established when the participant is involved in the action task. And we didn't manipulate it, it was already manipulated in the condition, in all these experiments which were there. So in the experiment which was on the other side of the spectrum, meaning that the participant was sitting, the confederate was sitting there, but making the movements, but the participant wasn't making the movements, was just passively observing these movements. So the social context sort of, if you look at the literature, social facilitation theory and all, it's still there, but that does not just have any effect. But that co-representation to happen, that co-representation of the actions of the partners, to represent the partner sections as my own actions, I need to be involved in the task as a participant.
Following up on that, you brought social facilitation. I was just coming to that. How did your literature add to the existing social cognition theories of social facilitation and learning? Because you were hinting towards social cognition, because that's the idea also.
So, for instance, for the social facilitation theory, this proposes that there is an advantage, there is an overall advantage when there is a group setting. That wasn't the case here. The memory advantage wasn't there when there was just the observation of the participant, or just when when another person is sitting there. So all these experiments that I presented earlier, before I present my experiment, all this joint action research, they have conducted all these experiments. And the social facilitation effect does not influence the performance in such tasks. So this joint action context has to be established when you divide the task between two people, and the two people, they are taking the complementary parts of the task. So how this adds to this entire literature, I think it suggests different dimensions of it. That there is something.
Group dynamics theories, we already know that when people are from different hierarchical status in social cognition, it affects performance, right? So now when the confederate is someone whom the participant doesn't know, as a team, is it going to affect the performance in a social situation if replicated?
Maybe. I don't know, it's memory we are talking about here.
Yeah,
So
so
how will memory get influenced by
The
that?
memory is not getting influenced. The action the person is conducting is getting affected. For example, when I'm writing and suddenly probably Derek comes and stand here, my action will get affected with the fear that I'm getting emotionally overwhelmed and observed, right? So when the confederate is someone unknown to the participant, here you are trying to develop a social relationship. Is it going to have any extraneous role on it?
Sometimes when it's a stranger, you don't get pressure also.
So that's what I'm saying, that this is not a stranger at all, because and then there is a partnership that is being developed because they are asked to perform together. So
Either direction, it's good to know the effect, having a person who just met as a confederate versus somebody who will that effect personally.
yeah.
It's all social factors. That's what I was asking, how it was social
Yeah,
part
effect
was
was-
manipulated.
So yes, so this could be entire series of experiments to further investigate.
My
that,
question is
and
just based on the fact that you are moving beyond cognitive neuroscience to bring it into the prospect of social cognition. So that's where I was following up from.
Okay, but regarding this, no experiments come up, but there are EEG experiments which come up to my mind. So these EEG experiments were, but again, in all of these experiments, we just recruit the participants. And I do not remember any such experiment where they recruit specifically two people who come together as friends. Maybe that could be a different modification, and then we see whether that influences these results somehow, which will be a very interesting one. But as of now, and I've gone through a lot of literature on this, so as of now, I do not recall any such experiment. So I don't know. Cannot comment.
What is the inclusion criteria for your
Yeah,
participants?
that was another question I wanted to ask. Dexterity.
Yes, so for the so we only had the right-handed participants. So all of these participants, they were right-handed and they were making the movements with the right hand. However, in the EG study, because we wanted to have that counterbalancing condition, we had the left hand and the right hand participants.
So what I know of the mirror neuron literature, it is typically the person performs an action, when they observe the action, you see the similar activation, supplementary cortex, etc. So I really find it interesting in your data that passive observation alone is not enough. You really have to be engaged. But that said, so you're saying that it comes down to the action itself. To me, you can maybe argue it's memory, but this really seems an attentional effect to me, right? The attention leads to better encoding. So the question for me would be, is the act of pointing, is that, again, drawing the attention to the individual, which leads to better visual spatial encoding, such that they perform better on the test? Now, if that's true, then why would passive pointing not work? Because your first two images are true. If you walk by and you see somebody pointing up at the sky, everybody's going to turn and look to see what they're pointing at. It draws your attention, but that doesn't seem to be sufficient in that passive condition. So I do wonder, I don't know if you have this control, when they are pointing, either the participant or the confederate, did you always have them pointing at the objects, or could you have the object and they're pointing over here? So is it the active pointing that's drawing their attention to the screen, or is it the pointing of the specific object that allows them to encode the spatial location of that object?
So you mean that they look at the object here, but they point to some.
Yeah, so here's my object and they're pointing over here. My object's up here and you're pointing down here. Would you still get that improved encoding and memory?
No, it will be a detrimental effect because there is literature on this, and a lot of this literature actually suggests the negative effect of such movements when the movements are performed which are not congruent with the to be remembered
I
target.
get that. It's acting like a distractor in that case.
Yes, yes.
All right, so do you buy the idea though that again, that what you're doing is essentially focusing the attention on the objects, which leads to better encoding?
That is one
Is that
of the
is that the memory, the way you think of it?
Yes, that was our explanation when we looked at the eye tracking data, because that is the simplest explanation. But when we looked at the EEG data, it was much more complicated because we saw the motor potentials in that case. So we have also said that motor potential is a joint action condition, while the participant is having motor potentials in the action observation condition.
Well, I mean, the motor potentials are there because they're representing the motor action of the pointing, which then helps them encode the location. So to me, that makes sense.
Yes, but then if we limit our explanation only to the visuospatial attention, then the motor potential idea doesn't fit in. So that was one of our explanation. Before we did the EG study, but then when we did the EG study, it tells us if the data was very difficult to also explain. So we had several meetings to actually analyze this data and then come up with the right conclusions. Visuospatial attention is of course there because you look at the N1 that we found in the EG, so that actually corresponds to what we find in the eye tracking data. So there are higher fixations, higher derivations, and you have N1 there. So that is of course one theory. That is of course one explanation. But in addition to that, you also have motor potentials. So that means that this motor action that the participants are simulating also has something to do with the motor advantage, with the memory advantage.
Well, to look back around, and again, I'm just wondering what you all talked about. So again, why then do you only see this benefit of the attention of better encoding in the joint condition, I think you call it? The passive, if you're just observing somebody pointing, but you don't point yourself, you don't get that added benefit. Why not?
Exactly. So that was my question too. So I don't know, because in the passive observation condition, we had no differences in the, because this other person's pointing is still directing your attention towards more areas. But in that condition, we didn't see the eye movement differences, and we did not have the memory advantage. So that is why, that is perhaps one of the reasons why we moved forward with the EG study, because we wanted to investigate, because we were sure that something else is also happening. But what was that, we were not sure. So that's why we moved on to the EG study, because that wasn't enough. The visuospatial attention explanation wasn't enough for that. Because if that was true, we would also have it in the passive observation condition.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's almost like social mimicry. You have to mimic the person in order for that effect to take place.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I'm so sorry. So because Jared brought in and you responded with the detrimental effect of the distractors in that scenario, I was just wondering that if this is simulated in a social situation, the number of social distractors in any given social situation would multiply by n number of times than what it was on the screen. For example, you had 3 to 4 stimuli at a time, and either of them were square or circle. Very oversimplified. In a social situation, when we are pointing towards, like, switch off the light, I'm pointing the direction, but to get the person's attention towards the switch through my finger, the person has to navigate through so many distractors. So how do we simulate this? Like, how do we explain this in the social situation, the visuospatial memory?
Okay, interesting question. But again, these cognitive psychology experiments, they have limitations. Right? We cannot. So all the social situations.
That's a classic. No way.
They do have very critical implications even in a very interpersonal space. Where you say it's about pointing, I think it not be a very directive pointing, but your gaze is also, it's invisible, but it's pointed. That's true, right? Which can be picked up unconsciously as well. Yeah, we call it the joint attention. So again, it's the joint attention phenomenon which happens in all of these situations. When I point to something, other person point to something, and we are both then attending to one object in the space. That is the idea of joint attention. Again, a lot of people are mad about this. They are so. After the study was published, again, all these ideas such as joint attention, all these ideas picked up and people started investigating all of this. So yeah, this is not a very old field of research. It's very new, only 20 years old. And a lot of research is still happening and a lot of questions are being answered.
Yeah, so do you think it's the motor potential? Do you need that motor actual pointing, or can you just hold a laser pointer? Would that be enough? You're directing the attention, but you don't have the motor action.
It's motor action that has to be here because, okay, so I conducted the same experiment with a cartoon hand, which I didn't present here. So that cartoon hand,
So this experimenter was then replaced by a cartoon hand because again, the same idea, we wanted to investigate whether any stimuli which make the move very salient enough to have higher attention would have the same effect, right? If it's just the attention, then a cartoon hand would work, or anything which makes this move very salient enough and different enough from the normal area would work. But in that condition, we did not have any effect. So it is very specific to the partners and the social context, perhaps, which is established by dividing the task between them. Yes, so robotic partners, that I would love to do that experiment, but then I have to finish my PhD. But there are studies. There is again, as I said, there is a lot of interest in this area. A lot of people are coming up, and there is this one very interesting paper which is titled as "Not So Social Scientific." So that points out to the fact that this effect that you are talking about, the salmon effect that we are talking about, joint salmon effect, can actually be generated by have you seen that cat thing which moves his hand? There are a lot of sanctuary things. So they took that as the distractor thing or attention-seeking thing. So for instance, on one side of the screen, the participant was sitting, and on the other side of the screen, this cat thing was sitting. And this cat thing was moving its hand to grab the attention. And in those cases, Simon effect appears, but it had some limitations. So I'll have to go back to it exactly remember. But the social, but what is the bottom line of all of these studies is that social situations are important. It has something to do with the human partners. Because there were also studies which were conducted with the robotic partners, and then the effect doesn't appear in those cases. So, the social effect doesn't appear in those cases. The social compatibility effect, the Simon effect doesn't, the joint Simon effect doesn't appear in those cases.
It's a very interesting book, but I was just interested. So I was thinking for, I think, it's like the type of pointing we do. So if it's a circle, if we just point it like this, or if we just point it like this, or if we just point it like this, so that have an effect. Because if you draw a circle, that's going to create energetic type of movie also, wherein the pattern is stored. So like even when we are pointing at sky, some people just directly look at the thing. But then you have to say a few cues for that, and then the working memory is better.
Yeah. I assume if we replace these pointing moments with the moving, if it's a circle, you move your hand like this, if it's a square, you move. I'm assuming the same effect. It will happen. It will still happen because as long as there is a congruent action involved, which is directed towards or to be remembered stimuli, if it's not contradictory, the effect will be appear. Yes,
I love the experiments you did. Can we have this in class scenario? Like I was just wondering if we are pointing out at what we are teaching, will it have any effect on the head?
It does, because in that case it's a simple attentional explanation, because there is a lot of stimuli on the screen and we point to some of that, that means we are highlighting some of that stimuli. It also happens how we learn, because for instance for students they highlight some part of the, so it's also the selection for action. You select some content from the environment, select some stimuli from the environment for further action, and that is salient enough for you to be stored in your memory better. So the selection for action also has an advantage.
Yeah, Divya, I was just like in the same context. I was thinking, is it more about the readiness to act, right? So like because you said that there's a motor load as well, and we know that like it's a frontal kind of load in that case.
It's a choice reaction 10 experiments, no?
So we did with the, that's why we replicated this result with the PE regular ordination condition, just to eliminate that. So in that case, we still have that. So if the participants are anticipating when they are, so for instance, in the random ordination condition, we could think that they are anticipating when they are going to move. So in that anticipation, the readiness potentials will be there. They will need the action planning and they will try to, come up with a movement. But then, so
but
then
if you
that's
do like all the ones, like all the participants together, all the experiments together, then
I
that
didn't
doesn't
have,
come.
it could. I did not have that condition.
Yeah, because when Sandhura is saying that, like, so I'm thinking about when they're presenting together. So if there's social loading and one couple of students are not presenting at all, then it doesn't contribute to their memory for that matter, right? But if even if the student is presenting very little, then their readiness to kind of perform, then they're more involved, right? So I don't know.
No, I didn't follow those. I didn't follow the student example.
Like if I'm a student who's working in a group and I'm completely open, I'm not doing any work, right? I'm just sitting and passively observing. Then there's no need for me to be ready, alert, right? So my attentional cognitive load is zero, maybe, or whatever it is. But even if I'm doing very little part of that presentation, you're going to come in and like talk about one slide. But my readiness is constantly there. So what you're saying was you reduced it. Even if you reduced it to the minimum, you still saw it.
Yes, we still have the effect. So that it is actually somewhat similar situation as you were mentioning that even if there is very little involvement from one participant, they still manage to, to have the entire presentation final represented.
Yeah.
Then when they're not. So it's somewhat similar, we could say.
It's an interesting idea. Is there any literature on that? Potential allocation based on the reliability of the participant? Is that true? I mean, do you know, has that actually been shown?
No, I just know that like the readiness load has like it takes up a lot of like cognition from the frontal brain, like from the prefrontal brain specifically, and because she talked about working memory, so I'm just correlating these.
No, I mean,
But I'm sure there might be some
if you know somebody's unreliable, they point to something you may ignore them, rather relative to somebody you know is on top of it.
Yes, exactly.
The result slide. This one?
Yeah, that's the problem.
If you're thinking when the qualifying exists, your voice will not go in the recording.
Do we have more questions?
I just have one question, just out of curiosity, not related with the major variables. What made you,
That's meant.
what made you interested,
In
in
this
this area of research?
Okay, so my PhD advisor, she works on working memory, and I was the one who was interested in the joint action. So we sat together, we combined the two, and we came up with this series of experiments, which served the purpose for both of us, because then when I presented this work to her, the joint action scenario, the joint action condition, she was very fascinated by it, but because her area of research was solely working memory and specifically visuospatial working memory, she didn't want to navigate a lot. And anything that has something to do with cognitive psychology and experiments that interests me. So we then came up with these experiments. So yeah, like no
I
major.
got one last one, very dumb question, but I'm just curious. So do you think this company only benefits the Visuospatial sketchpad? Is this a phonological loop talk? Any benefit? So if you're doing wordless learning, pointing, does that help, do you think?
I don't know, maybe not. I don't know. We'll have to do experiments to check that. I don't know, because again, this was very new. So perhaps on visuospatial working memory, this was the first series of experiments which came up like this. We are waiting for further people to pick this research up and then maybe do it, extend it to the phonological loop.
I'd be surprised. I suspect it's just Visuospatial. It would be interesting.
Because the movement has because the movement has the inner slide, so the inner slide component that we have in the special sketchpad actually deals with the movements. So perhaps could be limited to the special sketchpad, but again, without conducting experiments, I am not sure.
Just thinking aloud, if brain will play a role for blind people in this, because they will be pointing out in a different direction, different way. If that might influence the encoding and the visuospatial memory in a different. Because couldn't find any component of phonological loop in this, we just went there. Sorry.
Okay, great. Great questions, but I just don't have answers for all of
question.
them.
This is just thinking aloud.
Okay. Again,
Blind person,
could be.
Yeah.
I think you still find it there. I mean, these are visual, lateral, visual, medial.
So, blind person, indication is happening through the brain language.
Very
how
nice.
the
Brand language.
brand language,
Yeah,
so
okay.
how that might influence visuospatial memory, because they have their own language of encoding memory, right?
Still now pointing would come to brain, right? They have
Yeah.
to touch, right? They
So exactly. So if this pointing through touching, that will have any role, and I don't know how that
If they cannot see the passive observation condition, it is about selecting some stimuli for further processing. So the passive observation has to be there.
audio stimulus and they have to point to where the stimulus
No,
is
no,
coming
no. In
from.
that case, you are merging two modalities. You are merging the auditory and the visual modalities.
That's the
So
only way
I
I
don't
think
know.
logical
It complicates the task. A lot of new experimental ideas, but just not funding to do that. Okay, then. So thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah.
With this findings, what is the practical application that we can?
Okay, I hate this question. So, Avardhan, these are cognitive psychology. So, a lot of experiments that, for instance, I'm teaching in the classroom. A lot of these experiments, they do not directly replicate the situations that you see in the real life. But in the real life, you cannot test them as they are. So you have to have simpler versions of these experiments which you can then conduct in the laboratory and test those specific phenomena. So these experiments, these sort of experiments, the controlled laboratory experiments where you can control as many variables as you can and try to only investigate one specific thing, they help grow the literature in a way that can further have applications. Because if we don't understand how, for instance, movements and for instance how inner style component, which is a spatial component, how does that have a role to play with the spatial sketchpad or the other component, which is the visual cache, which takes care of the static images. If we don't know, if you're not clear on that relationship, I don't know. So it's all drawing the literature. Thank you. But it's a great question, but I just hate it. Because I get this question every time.
I hope you liked it. Every month coming up.
Thank you. Okay, thank you so much, Divya.
Thank you.
And then this includes.
I think